Hi to everyone and welcome to our OPC Router webinar. It's fun to see that so many was able to join. So that's going to be fun. I'm Tina and I work with marketing in Novotek Norway. And with me today, I have two guests. That is Thorsten Weiler and Jan Jebens from Inray, which is the company behind OPC Router. And they are the ones that will tell you a lot more about OPC Router today. So before we start, I will just show you the agenda. First, I will just give a super short introduction to OPC Router, and then you will get to learn a lot more about the features from Thorsten. And then Jan Jebens will do more of a practical introduction with a live demo. And before we end, we will have time for some Q&A. You can write your questions in the chat at any time, or you can turn your mic on and ask the question when it's time for Q&A. But during the presentation, we would prefer if you just use the chat. So before I set over to the others, I will do this quick introduction about Novotek and OPC Router. Novotek is a distributor for Inray and OPC Router. In each country we do have Novotek. We have implemented the software with success at many of our customer sites through the years. OPC Router is a software integration platform, or also called a middleware, that is used to send data between different systems. This makes the foundation for Industry 4.0 and digital transformation. It comes with a wide range of plugins for a lot of connectivity options. I know that many of you here already use Kepware, so I just want to mention that OPC Router works very good with KEPServe EX. So that was it from me. So now I will set over to you, Thorsten.
Thank you very much, Tina. So I will share my screen, and I hope you can see it now. Sorry, but it should now. Now you should see my slides, hopefully.
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Tina. And hey to everybody who's joined. Thank you very much for joining and your interest in OPC Router. And maybe before I start with my slides, one comment. So what Tina already mentioned that OPC Router is working very, very well with KEPServe. One of the reasons behind that is that we have something in common with Novotek. So Novotek is the preferred distributor for Kepware in Scandinavia and Benelux and also UK and other countries like Switzerland. And Inray, so my company, our company, is preferred Kepware distributor for Germany and Austria. So this is what we have in common, and this is the foundation of how OPC Router started to become a product 20 years ago already. Just as a quick introduction. So we are using and selling OPC Router and Kepware together since a long time already. Okay, so Tina already mentioned what OPC Router is. Just to give you some more insight before you see the live demo of my colleague Jan, what OPC Router is and what it does, because the name sometimes is a bit misleading. So if you hear router, a lot of people think it's a hardware-based gateway or something like this, which it isn't. So it's definitely a software like Kepware. It needs to be installed on a server, on a computer, on a controller somewhere. It can be installed together with Kepware on one system, but it doesn't have to be. OPC in the name seems to be a needed connectivity protocol, which it isn't. This is a historical name because 15, 20 years ago, when we started to work with OPC Router, we were working a lot with OPC. And then we developed a lot of more plugins so that we today have a lot of projects where we don't use OPC at all. So of course, in a lot of projects, we still connect to an OPC server to get data from the PLCs, like using Kepware as an OPC server. But we also have a lot of projects where we just connect ERP systems and databases or cloud systems and printers or anything else without using OPC. So OPC is not a mandatory protocol to use OPC router in the end. So it's a software-based communication platform, and it's connecting all kinds of systems. So no matter if these are IT systems or OT systems, and yeah, it's offering more than 40 different kinds of plugins and protocols, standard plugins, standard protocols, but also specific protocols that OPC router supports. Specific, like for example, SAP and speaking native SAP protocols like RFC, BAPI, or IDOC, for those of you who are familiar with SAP. What's the value add, especially if you compare it with Kepware? So Kepware is more or less, at least from my perspective, an OPC server. So what Kepware does very well is it connects to PLCs and translates all these different PLCs protocols like Modbus, Profibus, Profinet, and so on into OPC, into a standard protocol, automation protocol. OPC router is more the middleware sitting between this level of the production, between the PLC level and other systems, other OT systems or other IT systems. So to connect with PLCs, we like to use an OPC server like Kepware, for example. So OPC router does not speak Modbus or Profibus or Profinet, but it speaks everything else upwards from the PLC level. So it offers a huge amount of available plugins. And this is something I think makes OPC router pretty special. It's not a middleware which only speaks 5 or 6 different kinds of protocols, as most of small middleware solutions like REST or MQTT, OPC, maybe database. It speaks a lot more languages and offers a lot more connectivity options, so that you can connect all your existing systems with only one OPC router solution, and you can connect them with each other. And another thing, and this is what you will mainly see in the live demo of my colleague Jan, is really the ease of use. So key of OPC router is the operational simplicity of the software. And I know that every software vendor is telling that their software is easy to use, easy to handle. But you will see that you really can create connections between, I don't know, complex systems like SAP and Kepware, or between a database and a cloud system just via drag and drop. So you don't need to script anything. You can just drag and drop and double click and choose and so on, just via mouse, and you can create complex connections in a few seconds or in a few minutes. So, but you will see that in the live demo afterwards. And I think this is what makes OPC router really special. Regarding the OPC router deployment or the OPC router system environment, OPC router of course supports Windows systems like Windows Server systems, but also if you are working with edge systems like edge computers or small controllers like PAC controllers, also GE controllers or something like this, and they are running Linux, you can also run OPC router in a Docker container on Linux system environments. Just for you to know that this is possible too. And this is just a simulation on how a typical OPC router project could look like. So there's data coming from a machine, from the shop floor, maybe from an OPC server, maybe from Kepware. Like a production order has been finished, and that information goes to an ERP solution. No matter if this is SAP or Microsoft Dynamics or any other kind of ERP solution that you are using. So the data is going to the ERP, and the ERP solution, for example, then sends information to an industrial printer to print the label for the finished production order to be labeled on the finished product. But also at the same time, in parallel, there could be data transfer between office or communication system, like an email or a telegram message, or you have some Excel sheets or CSV files or Microsoft Teams chats, and this information goes for example, into a database, because for maintenance reasons or anything else, and you have a database related maintenance system. Also, if you are using cloud systems or any kind of web services that you can connect via REST, you can exchange data between such a cloud system or web service and databases, no matter if these are relational databases like Microsoft SQL Server or NoSQL databases like InfluxDB or MongoDB. And also the other way around, of course. So you can imagine the bubbles going from any place to any other place. So these are all the systems you can connect. And on this slide, you don't see all the systems that can be connected. So there are much more than we just show here on this slide. So it's just to give you an impression and some ideas of which of your systems you can use to connect. And maybe you already recognize some of the systems you already have in your company. Maybe not in your department, but maybe also in another department, like in the IT department or office department, like the ERP solutions or something like this. Regarding Kepware, so if you're already using Kepware, you can of course connect Kepware to any of those systems easily via drag and drop using OPC Router. So you have Kepware connected to your PLCs, and then you can connect Kepware, and with that also the PLCs, using OPC Router to any cloud system, to any ERP solution. You can do scripting if needed, but you don't need to necessarily. Databases, office systems, RFID system, printers, any kinds of machines and shop floor systems. So you can enlarge the power and the communication power of Kepware to a lot of other systems. The same also is if you are already using GE. So if you're using GE for HMI SCADA, you can also connect GE to these systems with OPC Router. If you are, for example, using GE Historian for data collection, you can use OPC Router to acquire data from these systems and store them into GE Historian. Or you can also get data out of GE Historian and send them to, I don't know, maybe a reporting, dashboarding, MES, or analyzing system. Whatever you are planning to do with the historical data in GE Historian. So this is just to give you an impression what you can do with your existing systems. You can make them really IoT ready to connect them to any kind of other system you might have in your company, no matter if it's GE or Kepware or SAP or Microsoft SQL Server or a simple Excel sheet. Okay. But now coming to how does OPC Router work? You will see that in the live demo of my colleague Jan, but just to give you a quick introduction of what you are about to see is, so we have the so-called plugins, which are defining the supported protocols. So the licensing of OPC Router is a bit similar to Kepware. So you have a license which is licensed without any limitation. The only limitation is the number of installations. So one license can be activated or licensed once for one machine. And then you just need to choose the plugins you would like to have. If you would like to connect, for example, Kepware to a database, then you would choose the OPC client plugin and the relevant database plugin. So then you will have a list of plugins that you have chosen when you have purchased OPC Router, and you can purchase additional plugins whenever you want. When you have these plugins, you will also have automatically these transfer objects. That's what we call the so-called data sources or destinations. So the data targets and the data sources, where the data is coming from and where the data is going to, we call them transfer objects. And we just drag and drop those transfer objects to tell the system, hey, this is the data source, this is the data target. Then we can double click on these boxes. When we've dropped them, we will get a box, and we can double click on these boxes, and then there will be a pop-up window where you can automatically browse all the available tags, and you can choose the tags you would like to transfer. And the only thing you need to do between the data source and the data target is to draw an arrow with the mouse from each tag or each variable to the target to make sure that the data, for example, the temperature value from the PLC is really going to the temperature variable in the database. So you're telling the system, hey, this value of this data point is going to this variable in this data target. And that's it. So you created your connection. And the only thing you then need to do is to choose a trigger. So there are a lot of triggers available to trigger the data transfer. For example, a time-based trigger to transfer data every 300 milliseconds, or a value-based trigger. As soon as the temperature is higher than 50 degrees, then please transfer the data. Or a cron trigger, like every Monday at 12 o'clock, please send that information to the maintenance team. And so on and so on. Bit triggers, data change triggers, like the production order number changes in the PLC or in SAP, then trigger, then transfer the data. So this is really how it works. And in the end, it's really 5 easy steps you need to do to create a simple connection. So the first thing is you choose your data source transfer object. Let's say an OPC client to connect with an OPC server. Then you choose your data target transfer object. You drag and drop them. You will see that in the live demo. A data target could be a database, could be SAP, could be a printer, could be anything. Once you've chosen these transfer objects, you double-click on each of them and select the tags you would like to transfer and the tags on the other side where the values should go to. So it's just picking those tags out of a list. Then you draw the connections between those boxes. So you draw them with a mouse. Some of them can also be drawn automatically. Maybe you will see that in the demo. And the last step is to select your trigger. And that's how you create a connection. And to show you on a slide how this looks like, it's like you have the transfer objects here on this side. So you choose your data sources, you drag and drop them here. You do the same with your data targets. So you look for your data targets in that list and you drag and drop them here. You double click on these boxes and you will get a pop-up window and you can browse all the available tags of those systems, and those tags that you've selected will be in that box afterwards. So this is a pretty simple example. So we only have one tag or one variable, one value of each of the data sources here. Of course, you can have multiple. So we, for example, take the system time and we'll save that system time in the timestamp variable of the database. And at the same time, there's a temperature value coming from Kepware, which should be written into a temperature variable in the database. And there's a constant value, which could be a source number, a machine number, a production line number, a user name or whatever. And that should also be sent to the database. So what you need to do to make sure that the values are going to the right variable is just using the mouse by drawing arrows to make sure this value is going here, this is going here, and this is going here. And in the end, you just need to define a trigger. So you can choose of a variety of triggers. In that case, it's a time-based trigger. And every 3,000 milliseconds, every 3 seconds, the values of these data sources will be written into the variables of the database. And that's it. So it's really as simple as that. And it's no matter if you have a database here or SAP or a printer, the method how you do this is always the same. So it should be pretty simple to do by just dragging and dropping. I'm just mentioning this shortly because I guess you might also see that in a demo. So if you have your connection here, you also have the option for a real-time monitoring and diagnostic. So you can see which data transfers happen. So every green dot is showing you a successful data transfer here. You can see how long the data transfer took. So for example, most of them took 5 to 10 milliseconds, but there's one which took almost 90 milliseconds. So you can click on that dot here, for example, and then you see the values that have been written at that time, and maybe you find out why this has taken much longer than the other ones. So you can do some diagnostics and analysis, and you can see, hey, all the data transfers have been successful. If it should not be successful because maybe the data target is not available, then you will see a red dot here. And if you click on the red dot, you will see the value at that time here. And you also will see the reason why the data transfer has not been successful. So there will be a red frame around the transfer object, which had an issue. In that case, it is the database transfer object. And if you go mouse over on the database transfer object with a red frame, you will get an error message that the database was unable to create a connection. So there must be a connection failure between the database and the OPC server. Could be a network failure, or the database is located on another machine, and maybe that machine has a problem or something like this. So you can find out very quickly where the problem is. Speaking about easy data transfers, like I've shown before, you can also implement some logic and make much more complex data transfers. This is just a simple example for a complex data transfer. In that case, we would like to send an email to a specific list of maintenance personnel, depending on the machine where we have an issue. And this email should be sent out when a temperature is equal or higher than 55 degrees. If that temperature value is higher than 55 degrees, then please send an email to the right maintenance personnel. And in that email, you will have that standard text and the asset number, the temperature value, and the alarm time. So how you do this with OPC Router is you have these are all your data sources. Once you have that critical temperature value here, it will be written into that email. But at the same time, the system is looking for, okay, which production line or equipment has been on which production line or equipment is that temperature value showing up. So, and this value goes into a database, and depending on the value of the production line or the asset number, there will be a specific email address. Like Joe is responsible for production line number 2, Sven is responsible for production line number 5, and I don't know, Jan is responsible for production line number 10. And depending on the production line or asset number, the right email address will be inserted into the distribution list of that email. And that's mainly it. So there's some other data added as to that email, and the trigger is doing more or less of the logic behind this, because the trigger will send the values once the temperature is equal or higher than 55 degrees. But it doesn't send that email every second then. It will send that email once again if the trigger has been reset before. And to reset the trigger, the temperature needs to be equal or lower than 53 degrees. Then the trigger will be reset. When the temperature goes up again after that, then that email will be sent once again. So that's the kind of logic you also can do with OPC Router, which is, yeah, and you can send a lot of more complex information that are depending on each other to a data target or via email or whatever. I will not go into details about this, just to let you know. So if you would have a need for higher availability, OPC Router offers a redundancy system. It also can work in a cross redundancy with Kepware. So if you have two systems with Kepware and also OPC router, then you can have a cross redundancy, which means if the primary OPC router should fail, the secondary one will still communicate with the primary Kepware system. If the primary Kepware system should fail, the primary OPC router will still connect to the secondary Kepware system and get the data from there. And if you have other systems and you're not using Kepware, you're having other OPC servers, or you are using SAP or any other kind of third-party system which is running in redundant mode, you can create this kind of cross redundancy using OPC router. And also to mention quickly, OPC router, if you cannot afford to lose any data, OPC router offers also a store and forward feature. So if data is coming from a data source and it should go to a data target, OPC router will process the data as usual. If the data target should not be available for any reason, like the database has a maintenance from the IT team, the server breaks down, the network connection has a failure or something else, OPC router will store the data and buffer it in an internal Mongo database. And once the connection to the data target is up and running again, OPC router will continue to transfer the current data to the data target, but also the buffered data to the data target to make sure that no data points are lost in the process. So enough talking. I would like now to hand over to my colleague Jan and showing you the system live. Yeah, I hope I kept my promises that the software is easy to use. So the stage is yours, Jan.
Yeah, thank you, Thorsten. So I will quickly share my screen. So now everybody should see my virtual machine with OPC router. Yeah, as Thorsten said, OPC router, when it comes to using it, first of all, maybe the architecture is, we have two parts, so to say. The first one is the management. That's what we see here. It's a graphical user interface. It's basically a Windows application running in the Windows user context that you are logged on to the Windows operating system. This is where we administrate all source and destination systems, what we refer to as plugins, and where we create connections. At some point when you activate a connection, it's being passed to the OPC router runtime, which is running as a Windows service. So we have the management, which is running as a Windows application in the Windows user context. And the second part then is the Windows, or is the runtime environment of OPC router running as a Windows service. You can install the management centrally on a desktop PC or wherever, and then manage several OPC router runtimes distributed through the networks. Thorsten also had a slide on this. So you could have 10 runtimes, and then from one management, you can administrate them. That would be one option. And if there are large-scale applications or deployments of OPC router within a project, then we also have different mechanisms to fulfill that. But yeah, that's the architecture. Quickly, maybe, as Thorsten also said, you have different icons here on the very left side. That's how you operate OPC router. You, first of all, of course, in this next example, I would like to transfer data from a Kepware OPC server into a Microsoft SQL server as a first example. In order to do that, of course, you have to configure the necessary plugins. So the first one would, for example, be an OPC UA client. You double click it. In this middle section, everything, we call it the workbench. That's where you administrate systems and create connections. It's always organized in tabs. In return, you get a list of all OPC servers installed. In this case, I have 2. You supply the necessary data here, and at some point, you would maybe make a connection test, and then if that connection test is successful, you can use that. So it's basically supplying connection data. Same counts for Microsoft SQL Server, also a tab. You double click, the dialog certainly looks different, yeah, depending on the system you want to connect to. And then once you have done that, you're fine. Next step, left side here would be connections, different types. We have template instances, very interesting feature, regular connections, but they basically work the same. So I will give you an example using regular connections. They are organized usually in folders, and within those folders, you would have your connections depending on the use case. So first of all, I will create a folder just to give you an example. Yeah, whatever. And it's called maybe OPC to database. Within a folder, then you right click or use the icons up here in order to create a connection. So I will give this production data to database. This is also then creating a tab up here, and you have several icons with interesting functionality to it. But what you basically do is on the very right side here, you create connections using transfer objects. This is, you design the data flow between systems. And below here in the trigger section, you have events that would execute a connection. And that's basically it. Unless you're scripting, that would be programming your transfer object or triggers yourself. OPC Router is meant to be a graphical user interface or software product, whatever. You use it like drag and drop. My source is an OPC server. My destination is a database. So those are the transfer objects I need. Always in the beginning, make sure when you go to information to enable show transfer steps. That makes it a lot easier. So I double click the transfer object that I want to configure. In the dialog here for the OPC server, I choose the relevant OPC server. And then, basically the machine. This is now a tree of all configured PLCs on Kepware side. Could be any OPC UA server. The production data in this case, for example, I have some current amount, current temperature, maybe a batch number and a product ID. That's what I want to read from the OPC server, so I apply it. The database, I prepared, a Microsoft SQL server in this case. I want to do a simple SQL insert. Could also be stored procedures, very interesting for real-world applications. But here we'll choose the insert. I prepared a table for it. I choose all relevant columns to store the data from the OPC server. And that's basically it. Now, doing the matching is you would drag and drop connection lines, or if the names are equal to some extent, then OPC Router can do it for you. There are some features like variables. They would always by default provide information like system time UTC in this case. So it's the current time on the server, could also retrieve from the OPC server. But that's basically it. You have source and destination system depicted by the connection line. And finally, a trigger. So usually you have at least 2 transfer objects. In this case, I will choose the data change trigger, classic trigger. So here I will also, of course, choose the OPC server. The PLC that I want to communicate with. In this case, I say, okay, whenever the current amount changes, I want this connection to be executed. There are a lot of data and functionality added to each trigger, but we're just using it as a simple data change trigger in this case. And that's it. I have at least one trigger, probably one or multiple, at least 2 transfer objects. And that's it. The information flow is from left to right and top bottom. So if I had another transfer object like MQTT and I put it up here, it would be in step 2. if I drag it down here, would be step 5. So that's how you design the execution order. And that's it. So last step, we are in the, well, in the management, so the application, but we have to pass it to the runtime. So I say, go productive. That would be the same going here or using this shortcut. As Thorsten also showed on the slides. And now this connection is being passed to the OPC router runtime in the background. Then it will at some point jump over to the status monitor, where we now leave the application. This is the application. And now we're looking at the runtime environment. So it will activate it, connect to the OPC server. Each time the current amount changes, this connection is executed. The data here is read from the OPC server and transferred into the database. And then it's depicted up here in this chart for, find out if your connection works properly. And that's basically it. There's no difference anymore. If you learn how to drag and drop transfer objects and triggers, you basically find use when it comes to operating the OPC router. Certainly in the real world, there are other challenges like complex data types, arrays, and so on. You would have to pass files and so on and whatsoever. But regarding the use of OPC router, that would be it. There's no change to it unless you program your own functionality. So for example, if I quickly had a JSON file, I could drag in a JSON object, fill some values here. I can program it myself or copy paste it, create a JSON object, and then send it to a file. So there's no, actually it would be a file, right? But yeah, there's no limitation regarding the type or the amount of transfer object here. You can just go ahead and you always do it the same way, dragging and dropping. So that would be the live example of how you basically use it here. I have prepared some other applications here. Let me start maybe. I have the barcode, for example. It's always interesting. As Thorsten said, we don't have many protocols from the field bus. Yeah, shop floor is so to say. And that's where we use Kepware. But some we do have. And it happens that you have a barcode reader, for example, and people always ask how to use it. Actually, you have TCP connectivity, usually. TCP pure protocol. There's just a connection made to the barcode reader running as a server if you want. And what you do is you supply, for example, here, a name of a host or the IP address and a port. And what we always need is what is the end of message character. That's what you need to know. So you define it here. It's an enter or character return. And within a connection, then you just drag and drop the barcode reader in here. That's a trigger. Receiving information is a trigger. We receive the scanned barcode, retrieve some data from a database again, and write an OPC server as we have seen it before. And if I go to the status monitor, I've prepared an example here. So you see, when I tested this now, last 1 minute, the view. Actually, I don't have a barcode reader, but what I then always do is I fake it. So I have an IP address, and I type in some string that is meant to be read by the barcode reader. I append the correct end of message sign, and I send it. And then, just a second. OPC router retrieves that information and does the rest again. Always the same. So barcode reader and the other plugins are sometimes interesting, particularly RFID and or Euromap being OPC companion specifications. But next example would be, of course, SAP. Real quickly, maybe we communicate with SAP using ERP web services, SOAP-based, REST, SAP HANA, or native SAP communication based on their communication libraries. So it's bidirectional. I can call SAP via RFC, BAPI, or IDOC, and SAP can also trigger OPC router and at the same time send us data using RFC or IDOC. RFC is interesting, probably most often implemented in the field, bidirectional communication, and it's synchronous. You always know if they received our message, and the other way around as well. When they send us data, they know we have received it. So here in this case, I changed some parameter on a PLC or PC server in this case, a product ID. For that specific product ID, I want to retrieve information from SAP calling, a function, so to say. RFC is a method, has a name, input, output parameters. I call that function on SAP side, define the parameters, then here I do another select just to show you how you can combine transfer objects. And once I've done that, the retrieved information is then sent to the PLC for production purposes. And it would look like this. I have maybe also here last 1 minute. So I changed a parameter on the product ID for a new product in my production line. I used the quick line quickly here. Was it machine 2? So I changed it to 145 because I know it exists. So it's been changed. And here you see the transfer. And this is now, we actually have an SAP system running here on our side. And we are communicating with SAP directly, just by drag and drop. You browse the SAP system, define the method that the programmer gives you, the parameters, and you're done. There's nothing more to it. Maybe quickly, when SAP calls us, there's something to it. You would define methods yourself. You give a name of the function, a program ID. It's everything explained here in a way that an SAP consultant would understand it. And that's it. Then you define the input and output parameters, or you browse the SAP system to import their structures and information models. And then SAP can call us. So that's a very interesting feature in the field, at least here in Germany. So yeah, that would be an example of SAP. And then last one then would be, if I have enough time, maybe REST communication. You can quickly create your own web service. You choose a REST trigger within a connection somewhere. Yeah. You choose that REST trigger here, and then, in the plugin settings, of course, an endpoint, which is the local machine in this case here. You define the methods that are allowed, the HTTP methods, get post, and then parameters in the header or per URL or whatsoever. In this case, I require a parameter as a query string, which is an URL parameter from the calling client. I would retrieve some data for the current production order, put it into a JSON real quickly here as an assistant, and send it back to the calling client. And the calling client itself would be an example where you have a product ID. Of course, this is supplied as the URL parameter, and then sent to the server, my own web service that I created here. The JSON is passed for the content and it's written to a machine. So this is a very easy example you can try yourself. And if I show it here, for example, I will quickly, the product ID on machine 1, if I changed it here, maybe twice so you can see it. Then there are transfers being made. So I called it. The data is passed to the web service. I receive the JSON. I parse it and write it to the OPC server. And of course, my web service that I created here also has 2 transfers. So very quickly to implement it. And another example, you find a step-by-step a manual on our website is for Teams communication. So what you do is you create a team and a channel. You get in return a URL where you can send your information to. And what you get is a JSON, a template from us on our website. And there's then the fact sections that you can change to send the information you want. I just copy pasted it, put in some information here, and then send the JSON using a REST call. REST call would be a transfer object. Yeah, to my Teams, my local Teams installation. So, and that's an example, a real world maybe that could be interesting and that you can test directly if you have MS Teams, of course. So now I manually triggered the connection, very good for debugging. This transfer is made, and of course it worked because I tested it before. In my Teams, I now at this point received some information that I put into the JSON. So, but yeah, I just showed you this example because you can try it yourself. Very often people have MS Teams. So yeah, and that would be it. Now we have, yeah, took some more time, but I'm done with the live demo so far. And I think hand back over to Tina for questions and answers.
Yes, I will just share my screen again. Here's my PowerPoint. So yeah, we are a bit over time, but I hope that's okay. If anyone, I have seen it's coming a bit of questions now. I've seen Thorsten answer some already, but if there is any question, just ask them in the chat, and Gina or Petter could read them out, and someone will answer.
There's one question I wasn't able to answer. I think it needs to be answered by Jan from Oman Musavi. How can control the trigger from another application, for example, from a website running in Docker inside a Linux server?
Well, how you want to trigger us regarding a web call, then I guess. Well, if it's using a web service, we can implement a REST trigger, provide an endpoint URL, necessary parameters, of course, and then you could call us directly using REST, for example.
I hope that answered your question, Oman. If not, just you know who to contact at Novotek. There has been another question. I don't want to waste too much time because we are already 4 minutes after the schedule. There was a question how to compare Kepware and OPC Router because there is a functional overlap. And yes, there is, but it's only a slight one. So for example, you can transfer data from Kepware to a database, or you can use Kepware IoT Gateway to communicate via REST or MQTT with cloud systems. This is also what OPC Router can do. I guess the best thing would be to connect to your contact at Novotek and go through your application and through your need, and they will be able to push you in the right direction if Kepware or OPC Router would be the better way for you. But it really depends on your individual use case. In some cases, I think Kepware can do the job pretty well, especially if you're already using Kepware, so that you don't need to purchase an additional license for OPC Router. In some cases, OPC Router will be much easier to use and offers you more features. But this is something we really need to have a look at from use case to use case. And there's another question, I think. Does the OPC Router support ICCP communication? That's also something that Jan needs to answer. I don't know.
Actually, not by default, I guess. But we could always use a script maybe to implement it. That would be the only thing I can think of at the moment. Otherwise, we would have to look into more detail. to this
Yeah.
requirement.
And I think that's a good point, Jan. I think so. We promote OPC Router as a pretty easy to use product, which it is. So you can just drag and drop everything. But if you need, and if you should have a really complex use case, then you can do scripting using C# and you can do whatever you want. So regarding that, OPC Router is pretty far open regarding functionality and can offer whatever you need if you're able to script via C#. But I said in 98% of use cases, you won't need scripting, but you can. Maybe before Tina closes the session, I have one slide left, which I wanted to share. Let me quick jump back to my slides. So yeah, this is just to show the overarching connectivity to different kinds of systems using OPC Router. Maybe you find some of the logos and you know, hey, this is used in my company. Then I could connect those systems. Please always feel free to connect to your local Novotek contact and ask them for further details. Just for you to know, there are also some documents available from Novotek. One is an SAP white paper. So if you are working with SAP or you know that you are using SAP in your company and you would like to know the value of OPC Router in that area, how you can connect your SAP ERP system with the shop floor or anything else, there's a white paper. And I think Tina will send that out after the webinar. And there also has been a question in the chat regarding a manufacturing package of plugins, like having a lot of plugins in one bundle. There is a package called Standard Subscription. There's also a document, like this is a screenshot of the document, which explains the Standard Subscription package and the content. So you can also get that from Tina and her team and her colleagues. And it includes 28 different kinds of plugins for a pretty low price. As a subscription license, so as a yearly license. In general, you can always choose between perpetual licenses, so you purchase a license, or a subscription license, which is you pay a yearly fee. So that's totally up to you what you would like to do. And this is it from our side so far. And with that, I would hand back to Tina, I guess.
Yes. So just before I'm ending, I would just like to tell you that we will continue with doing the OPC Router campaign. So the next thing we have planned is an OPC Router workshop, which will be in Oslo, April 20th, so just after Easter. And then there will be like a bit of hands-on, so you will get to try out OPC Router for yourself. So together with the SIP white paper, I will send you everyone a link to the registrations if you would like to join. I'm thinking that could be interesting if you found the webinar interesting. So yeah, that's it for today. And I want to say a big thank you to Thorsten and Jan for doing the webinar today, and thank you to everyone that joined. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you very much for everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.